I woke up to silence, not the peaceful kind. The kind of silence a house makes when it's already told you something and you just haven't turned around to look at it yet. No hum of the coffee maker my mother always leaves running for me when I stay over. The one that clicks on at 6:15 whether anyone's awake to hear it or not. No footsteps in the hallway. No car doors. No trunk slamming. None of the small chaotic noise that usually means my family is getting ready to leave somewhere together. Just quiet and gray morning light coming through a kitchen window and a folded piece of paper sitting on the counter where a coffee mug should have been waiting for me. I knew the handwriting before I even picked it up. My mother writes lists the way other people write letters, careful, a little too neat, like she's proud of how organized she can make an instruction sound. This one had 3 words on it: trash, plants, mail. Under that, smaller, almost an afterthought: thanks for holding things down, honey. I stood there for a second, holding a chore list like it was a job offer I hadn't applied for. And then my phone buzzed on the counter next to it. I want you to understand it wasn't a text. It wasn't, "We made it, love you, talk soon." It was a notification from Instagram, my sister Paige's name attached to it. And when I opened it, there she was. Sunglasses pushed up into her hair, a lake glittering behind her, a can of something cold sweating in her hand, like she'd been posed there for exactly this photo. The caption sat underneath her face in that easy, breezy font people use when they think they're being funny. Best trip ever, when she's not around, LOL. 2 letters at the end. LOL. Like it was a joke everyone was already in on except me. And I was just supposed to laugh along with whoever else scrolled past it, because how funny, right? How funny that the person who quietly pays for things is having the best time possible in the one scenario where that person isn't there. I didn't comment on the post. I didn't call her screaming. I didn't do the thing the version of me from 5 years ago would have done, which is sit down at that table and cry into a mug of coffee that had gone cold before I even noticed I was crying. I sat down, yes. But what I did instead was open my banking app. Here's the promise I made myself, sitting in that kitchen with a chore list under my elbow and a lake photo still glowing on my screen. And I want you to hold on to this, because everything that happens for the rest of this video is just me quietly keeping it. By the time their car pulled back into that driveway, every single card that had funded any part of their good time was going to be dead. Not, "We'll discuss it when you're home." Not, "Let's talk about boundaries." Dead. Declined. Done. Before they even landed. If you've never been the person in a family who gets remembered exactly when a bill is due and forgotten exactly when the fun starts, I want to back up and show you what 6 years of She Doesn't Mind actually looks like from the inside. Because by the time we get back to this kitchen, to this exact cup of coffee, you're going to understand why a 2-letter joke in a caption was the thing that finally broke something that had been cracking quietly for a very long time. I'm the one who remembers things in my family. That was never a compliment. It was a job description nobody officially handed me. I just picked it up one day in my late 20s and never got to put it back down. I'm a bookkeeper by trade. I spend my working hours making numbers behave, making sure nothing slips through a crack unnoticed. And somewhere along the way, without ever agreeing to it out loud, I became the unofficial bookkeeper of my entire family too. Let me give you a few examples, because she does a lot for them doesn't mean anything until you actually hear the math. There was the year my mother's electric bill got shut off twice because her card kept declining and she was, in her words, "So embarrassed, honey, just this once, I'll pay you back Friday." Friday came and went both times. I never brought it up again after that. There was the stretch where Paige swore, cross her heart, that the money for her rent was a 1-month thing while she waited on a paycheck, and 1 month turned into 4 before either of us stopped pretending it was temporary. There was the Thanksgiving 3 years ago where I drove 2 hours each way to pick up my grandmother because nobody else could make the timing work. Bought the turkey and the sides on my card because moms had already maxed out on holiday shopping, and then stood in the kitchen alone doing dishes while everyone else watched football. And when I finally sat down, someone joked that I looked like I needed a vacation, and everyone laughed, including me, because that's what you do. There was also the Christmas card photo 2 years ago, the one that still hangs in my mother's hallway. All of them lined up in matching sweaters in front of the tree, and I'm not in it because I was the one who'd offered to take the picture on the good camera instead of using someone's phone. Nobody suggested a timer. Nobody suggested I hand the camera to a neighbor for 30 seconds so I could step into the frame. I just wasn't in the version of the family that got printed and mailed out to relatives that year, and at the time I told myself it was efficient, that somebody had to be behind the camera, that it made sense. It took me a long time to notice how often being efficient and being invisible looked exactly the same from the inside. There were the birthdays, the anniversaries, the group gifts for people neither Paige nor I was even that close to, where somebody has to actually go buy the thing and collect everyone's share afterward. And it was never, not once, anyone but me chasing down 5 different Venmo payments 2 weeks after the fact. Every family trip, every cabin, every rental car, the deposit sat under my name because my credit was the one that didn't make anybody nervous. There was also the time about 1.5 years ago when Mom needed a new roof after a storm, and the insurance payout came in almost $4,000, short of the actual repair cost. Nobody in the family had that kind of money sitting around, obviously including me, but I was the one who found the contractor willing to split the remainder into payments, the one who sat on hold with the insurance company for 90 minutes, disputing the estimate, the one whose card ultimately absorbed the difference in monthly chunks for the better part of a year. Paige sent a single text that week. "So glad you're handling this. You're so good at this stuff." And I remember reading it and feeling something warm and something hollow at exactly the same time, because being praised for handling a crisis and being included in a family are not actually the same experience, even though they can look identical from a distance. Nobody in my family ever called any of this a debt. I never called it a loan. It had a softer name, the name every family gives it, helping. And I want you to notice something about the word helping, because it took me 6 years to notice it myself. Helping only goes in one direction if nobody's counting. So somewhere around year 3, I started counting. Quietly, not out of spite, just because a bookkeeper who doesn't keep books isn't actually a bookkeeper. She's just a person handing out money and hoping somebody eventually notices. Nobody noticed. Not until the week before Labor Day, which, looking back now, told me everything I needed to know if I'd been willing to actually read it instead of explaining it away like I always did. There's a group chat for the cabin trip. Cabin costs, groceries, gas, split evenly between everyone going. I know it exists because I've seen it referenced. I was never in it. Not removed, which at least would have been an event, something with a timestamp attached. Just never added in the first place, the kind of missing that looks like an accident exactly once, and then starts looking like a pattern the second time it happens, and by the 5th or 6th time, it stops looking like anything except a decision. I offered to drive up separately and meet everyone there. "No big deal," I said. "I'll just bring my own car, stay a night, head back early if it's crowded." Paige's answer came back within the hour, fast, casual, like she'd already rehearsed it for whenever I finally asked. "It's kind of couples and mom thing this time. You'd probably be bored anyway." My mother's answer came slower an hour or 2 later, and it was somehow heavier than Paige's, even though it used softer words. "Maybe you could help hold down the house instead, honey. Keep an eye on things for me while we're gone." The one person who actually said something honest that week was my cousin Dana, who'd caught wind of the trip through her own mother and texted me completely out of nowhere on Wednesday night. "Wait, they left without you? That's messed up. Are you okay?" I remember staring at that message for a solid minute before typing back something small and deflecting. It's fine, it's just a cabin thing. Because admitting it wasn't fine felt bigger than I was ready for at the time. Dana didn't push. She just said, "Well, if you want to complain about it, I'm here," and left it alone. I want to be honest with you. That text didn't fix anything. It didn't stop the trip or change a single plan. But it was the first outside proof I had that what was happening to me had a name other than just how our family is, and I carried that little bit of proof around in my pocket for the rest of the week without fully realizing how much weight it was quietly holding. I want to tell you about Tuesday of that same week too, because it's a small thing on its own, but it fits the pattern too neatly to leave out. Paige posted a countdown story. 3 days to go, a photo of the cabins listing pulled straight off the rental site, tagging Mom and Tyler underneath it. Not me. I wasn't tagged, wasn't mentioned, wasn't part of the little digital huddle of excitement building around a trip my card was quietly underwriting. I remember opening that story, reading the caption twice, and then closing the app and going back to whatever spreadsheet I'd been working on for a client. Because that's the other thing about being the reliable one. You learn to swallow things fast so they don't slow down your actual day. By Thursday, the chore list was already drafted on the counter in my mother's handwriting, sitting there like a job posting nobody remembers applying for. I stayed over that last night anyway, because that's what I do, that's the role, I show up. I made her tea before bed. I zipped the side pocket on her suitcase that never stays closed on its own. I told myself, the way I'd told myself 100 times before, that this was just how our family did things, that being the reliable one wasn't a punishment. It was a kind of love language, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need thanking out loud. In the morning, the garage was just empty. No goodbye kiss on the cheek. No, we'll miss you. Thanks for everything. Just a car-shaped gap where a car used to be, and a note about trash and plants and mail, sitting on the counter like I was the house sitter for a life I'd been quietly funding pieces of for 6 years. That's the moment nobody puts in a highlight reel, but it's the one that actually breaks something. Not the trip, not even the LOL, not yet. The chore list, because somebody sat down at that counter, thought carefully about the daughter who wasn't invited, and the thought that came out of that careful consideration was, staff. Here's the thing nobody tells you about being the bookkeeper of a family for 6 years straight. When it finally breaks, you don't rage. You archive. The very first thing I did before I made a single phone call, before I said a single word out loud to anyone, was open my laptop and create a new folder. I named it exactly what it was, because I don't believe in softening my own records, not even for myself. Labor_day_sol. Into that folder went a screenshot of the Instagram story before its 24 hours ran out and it disappeared like it had never existed, the way these things are designed to. Then a screenshot of the group chat scrolled all the way back to the exact day I was supposed to have been added and wasn't. Then screenshot after screenshot of Venmo requests going back years, every single. Just this once, I'd quietly paid without a single word of pushback. If the rest of my family wanted to treat this as a joke, fine. Jokes don't need documentation. But if this was going to be treated as a joke by everyone except me, then I was going to be the one person in the family who kept the receipts, and I mean that literally, not as an expression. I think I can actually name the year this started, if I'm being honest with myself. I was 22, fresh out of school, and my father had just left, and suddenly my mother needed a second name on the mortgage paperwork to keep the house from being reassessed at a rate she couldn't afford alone. I said yes without thinking twice, because that's what a good daughter does when her mother is scared at the kitchen table at 11 at night. Nobody sat me down afterward and asked whether I wanted that role permanently. It just quietly became the role, one favor at a time, until the one who handles things stopped being something I did and started being something I was. I don't regret saying yes at 22. I regret that 14 years later, nobody in that family had ever once asked if I wanted to keep saying yes. Once I laid it all out flat on my kitchen table, printed pages next to my laptop screen, it stopped feeling like hurt and started feeling like arithmetic. This exact trip, the one I'd apparently been too much of a mood killer to attend, had my name attached to it in 4 separate places, and I want to walk you through every single one, because the specificity is the entire point. $2,000 sat on my card for the cabin deposit, because when the booking went through months ago, my credit was the one the rental company trusted without a second look. $420 went to a grocery delivery I'd placed a full week before the trip even started. So the fridge would be stocked and cold drinks would be ready the second everyone walked in the door, because somebody always has to think of that detail in advance, and it is never, ever them. $190 covered what the family group chat casually called Mom's share of extending the rental 2 extra nights, a cost that had simply appeared on my statement without anyone asking me first, the way costs had learned to do over the years. And $86 paid for travel insurance on the entire group, purchased under my account, read start to finish by exactly one person, and that person was me. The $2,000 actually had its own small history if you want the full picture. Back in the spring, when Paige first found the cabin listing, the property manager had asked for a deposit within 48 hours, or they'd release the dates to someone else on the wait list. Paige's card had been declined at the deposit stage, something about a recent dispute freezing her limit, and Tyler's didn't have the room either, not with a car payment due that same week. So the group chat had turned to me, the way it always turned to me, half joking, half not. Can you just front it and we'll all Venmo you back? I said yes in about 90 seconds the way I always did, and I never once got a single one of those promised Venmo payments, not from Paige, not from Tyler, not from anyone. And somewhere in the following months the debt simply stopped being mentioned by anyone but me. I said those numbers out loud in my empty kitchen, clean and flat, the exact way I'd read a column of figures off a client's spreadsheet during a Tuesday morning meeting. No shake in my voice, no dramatic pause for effect. Just facts laid end to end. They wanted a meme. I was quietly building them a receipt, and receipts, unlike memes, don't disappear after 24 hours. I sat with those numbers longer than I probably needed to. And I think part of me was checking whether the anger would show up the way it always had before, the shaking hands kind, the kind that used to make me apologize for things that weren't my fault. It didn't come. What came instead was something closer to clarity, the same feeling I get when a set of books that's been off by a few dollars for weeks finally reveals exactly where the error started. It wasn't the $2,000. It wasn't even the 420. It was that every single one of those numbers had been invisible to them for years, absorbed so completely into she doesn't mind that nobody had ever once stopped to ask whose name was actually on the line. While I worked through the numbers, my phone lit up once, a call from Paige's, number that lasted 41 seconds and turned out to be nothing but like noise and someone laughing at something in the background. One of those accidental pocket calls that happens when a phone gets jostled in a beach bag. I watched it ring on the screen. I let it end on its own. I didn't call back to ask what she'd meant to say, because I already suspected the honest answer was nothing. She hadn't meant to call me at all. A minute after that call ended, exactly one text came through from my mother. Not, "We love you." Not even an acknowledgement of the chore list or an apology for the note. It said, "Don't forget the recycling goes out Tuesday. I want to be honest with you about something." That text is the one that actually finalized things for me. Not the trip, not the lake photo, not even the 2 letters at the end of the caption. That single, ordinary reminder sent from a lake house I had helped pay for, telling the help not to forget the trash schedule. So I made myself a rule, and I need you to hear this clearly, because it's the entire engine of everything I did for the rest of that day. If I'm not around for the trip, I am not around for the funding. That's not a threat. That's not a stunt designed to make anyone suffer for the sake of suffering. It's an access review, plain and simple, the same kind I'd run for a client whose spending no longer matched what they claimed they valued. If my actual presence in a room isn't worth including, then my money's presence in that same room isn't worth keeping either. I sat with that rule for a few minutes before I let myself act on it because some old, well-trained part of me wanted to talk myself out of it, wanted to find the version of this where I quietly absorbed one more thing and called it keeping the peace. That part of me had run the family finances for 6 years and never once gotten a single thank you card for it. And I finally let that part of me lose the argument. I thought, too, about what this would look like to someone outside the family, someone who hadn't lived inside 6 years of just this once. Would it look petty? Would it look like I was punishing my own mother over a joke, the exact thing Paige would surely say the moment the first card declined? I decided I didn't actually care how it looked from the outside, because the people who'd be judging it from the outside hadn't been the ones quietly keeping the lights on. The only opinion that mattered to me in that kitchen was my own, and my own opinion after 6 years of careful, patient bookkeeping was that the account was overdue. I took a sticky note off the pad by my laptop and wrote down 5 things in the exact order I planned to do them, calm, methodical, one at a time, well before their car ever turned back onto the highway toward home. I stuck it to the top of my screen where I could see it while I worked. 5 kills. That's what I called them in my head. And I'm not going to pretend that's not a little dramatic, because it is. But after 6 years of pretending everything was fine, I'd earned one dramatic label, even if the execution of it was about to be the calmest thing I'd ever done. I knew roughly what I was working with timeline-wise. Paige had posted that morning that they were starting the drive back around 11, which put them home sometime between 4 and 5 in the afternoon if traffic behaved itself. That gave me around 5 hours. I didn't need 5 hours. I needed maybe 90 focus minutes and the willingness to actually follow through on a sticky note instead of just feeling satisfied that I'd written it. Kill 1 was the trip itself, and it felt right to start there, since that's where all of this began. I logged into the rental portal where the cabin deposit had been sitting under my name since the booking went through, and I removed my payment method from the reservation entirely. Whatever nights were left on that stay, whatever damaged deposit might get disputed on the back end when everyone checked out, none of it was riding on my card anymore. If the property needed a new form of payment on file before anyone could leave, that conversation now belonged to whoever was actually standing in that cabin, not to the daughter who wasn't invited into it. Kill 2 was the shared wallets, and this one took a little longer because 6 years of convenience leaves fingerprints in more places than you'd think. There was the family Apple Pay group my mother had insisted on setting up for emergencies, which had quietly become the default for anything above $40. There was the joint house card, technically hers, practically funded by me every month that ran short. There was the backup debit card I'd added Paige to during what she'd called an emergency, which had long since stopped being temporary without either of us ever renaming it. One by one, I turned each one off. Not deleted in some dramatic flourish, just off, quietly, the way you'd close a tab you no longer need open. A family plan is supposed to mean the family plans together. Mine had just been quietly funding whoever happened to ask the loudest, the most often, or the least apologetically. Kill 3 was the autopays, and this is the one that genuinely took the longest, because it's the one where I found things I'd half forgotten I was even still paying for. Mom's streaming bundle, for different services stacked on top of each other, sitting on my card since the year her own card had been compromised and simply never got moved back off mine. Paige's phone line, added to my plan back when temporary meant 2 months while she got back on her feet, except 2 months had turned into 2 years without either of us acknowledging the math out loud. A car note assist for Tyler that had started as one single favor during a rough stretch and had, somewhere along the way, become a permanent, unspoken line item nobody ever thanked me for and nobody ever offered to take back over. I'll admit I paused on Tyler's car note assist longer than I paused on anything else that day. Not because I doubted the decision, but because Tyler had never once been unkind to me. Not really. He just quietly let a favor turn permanent the way everyone else had. And some old part of me wanted to carve out an exception for the one person who hadn't posted a lake photo with a joke attached to it. I let that thought sit for about 10 seconds. Then I reminded myself that an access review doesn't work if I only apply it to the people who hurt me directly and quietly exempt everyone who benefited from my silence without ever asking where the money came from. I canceled every one of them, cleanly, methodically, and watched confirmation emails land in my inbox one after another like a stack of little closing statements on a business relationship nobody had realized was ending. Kill 4 was the cloud and the keys, the quieter infrastructure of a family, the kind of access nobody thinks about until it's gone. The shared photo album where I'd been quietly covering the storage overage for 2 years because nobody else ever seemed to notice it was almost full. The smart lock code at my mother's front door, the one I'd set up myself and paid the subscription on so she'd never lose a physical key again, revoked in under a minute. The calendar sharing that let everyone in the family see exactly where I was and when I was free, which, when I actually sat and thought about it, had never once been used to include me in anything. It had only ever been used to know when I was available enough to be useful. I turned all of it off in about 10 minutes, and the strangest part was how light it felt, like setting down bags I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Kill 5 was the one that actually mattered the most, and it wasn't a cancellation at all. It was the narrative. I did not comment under Paige's story. I did not fire off an angry wall of text into the family group chat for everyone to screenshot later and hold up as proof that I was the unstable one, the dramatic one, the one who couldn't take a joke. Instead, I wrote one calm email addressed to all 3 of them at once, subject line short and plain. Going forward. The body of it was even shorter. Going forward, I would not be funding trips, bills, or emergencies that I wasn't invited into. Attached to that email was a single PDF, an itemized accounting of the last 6 years, dates, amounts, what each one had been for, laid out the way I'd lay out any client's file. Not an accusation. A ledger. I hit send, closed the laptop, and made myself a second cup of coffee while that email sat there, unread, somewhere over a stretch of highway they hadn't reached yet. It was somewhere in the middle of that last kill, sitting alone in a kitchen that had gone from silent to still, that I let myself notice something I hadn't let myself notice all week. I wasn't scared of what was coming. 6 years of being the reliable one had trained me to brace for other people's reactions before I'd even finished my own sentence. And for the first time and longer than I could remember, I wasn't bracing. I was just waiting, the way you wait for a pot to boil, certain of the outcome, in no particular hurry to rush it. I spent that stretch of the afternoon doing ordinary things on purpose, folding laundry, answering a client email, watering the one plant on my own windowsill, because I wanted the record to show, at least to myself, that I hadn't spent the day pacing and waiting for the explosion. I wanted to be someone who'd made a decision and then simply gone on living, not someone who needed the fallout to feel complete. Based on the timestamps I pieced together later, the first decline happened mid-ride share. A card tapped for gas that simply said no, the way cards do when there's nothing left behind them to say yes with. From there, the group chat, which I could see previews of without ever opening it, started doing exactly what group chats do the moment money stops, moving quietly in the background where nobody has to think about it. Paige went first, still trying for casual. Hey, weird glitch with the family card. LOL, you seeing this? My mother followed about 20 minutes later, and there was no LOL attached to hers at all. What did you do? I put my phone face down on the counter, and I let it ring. I want to be clear, that's not a figure of speech. I mean it exactly the way it sounds. I turned the phone over, screen down, and I let it ring and ring and ring. By the time they were actually home, I had 63 missed calls logged, and I know the exact number because I wrote it down the same way I write everything down. The voicemails told their own story if you listened to them in the order they came in, which I did once with a cup of tea in hand, the way I'd review any client's file from start to finish. The first few try for casual, still playing it as a technical hiccup. Okay, haha, very funny. Turn the card back on now, we're kind of stuck out here. A few calls later it shifts into guilt, the oldest tool in the family toolbox. After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us over a joke. A few after that, it turns into something closer to real anger. Voices cracking at the edges. Paige at one point snapping that I was acting insane over nothing. Somewhere in the middle of that stack, there's a longer one from my mother, over 2 minutes, where she tries out 3 or 4 different tones in a single message. Starting with confusion, sliding into hurt, circling briefly back to anger, and ending on a sentence that stuck with me more than any of the others. I don't understand why you're punishing all of us for one caption. I remember pausing my tea halfway to my mouth when I heard that line, because it told me more clearly than anything else that whole day that she still genuinely believed this was about a caption, and not about 6 years of statements with my name at the top of every single one of them. And then, right at the very end, right after the anger clearly hadn't worked on an audience that wasn't listening, it softens into something that sounded almost like concern. My mother's voice, quiet, saying she just wanted to know I was okay. Except it arrived about 6 years too late to be believed by anyone who'd actually lived through those 6 years. I didn't answer a single one of those calls live. What I did agree to, once things had quieted enough for an actual conversation, was one single call on my terms at a time I chose myself. My mother's face on that screen looked smaller than I remembered it looking in that kitchen a week earlier. Paige joined a few minutes in, sitting just off camera, arms crossed, the way she does when she already knows she's not going to like where a conversation is headed. My mother started where I expected her to start. We didn't think you'd actually do something like this. We just wanted a weekend to ourselves. I let that sit for a second before I answered. You had a weekend to yourselves. What you didn't get to have, apparently, was my money at the same time, and I think that's the part that's actually upsetting you right now. Paige leaned into frame at that point, voice tight. It was one joke in a caption. You're blowing this so far out of proportion. I didn't raise my voice, not once, the whole call. It wasn't one joke. It was 6 years of jokes I never got to hear because I was always the one paying for the punchline instead of laughing at it. I put the screenshot of the caption up on my side of the screen, right next to the ledger, side by side, and I said the only sentence that actually needed to be said. You can have a daughter. You can't have a silent sponsor. Those have never been the same job. And I'm done being paid nothing to do both of them at once. My mother tried a different angle after that, the one she always reaches for when the first approach doesn't land. I'm your mother. I raised you. Doesn't that count for something? And I felt the old version of me flinch at that line, the version that would have folded right there and offered to cover the difference on the extra nights just to make the tension in the room go away. But I'd already had this exact conversation with myself 100 times over the past week, in the kitchen, at my desk, in the car, so I had an answer ready that didn't require me to raise my voice or make her cry to be true. It counts for a lot. It's the reason I kept saying yes for 6 years instead of 1. But it's not a line of credit, and I think somewhere along the way, this family started treating it like one. There was a long pause after that. My mother tried once more, softer this time. "So what, you're just done with us?" And I told her the truth, which surprised even me a little as I said it out loud. "No, I'm done being the only one keeping the books on this family. There's a difference, and it's on you which one you decide to hear." Lost access to every payment app we'd ever shared between us. I didn't block her number. I blocked her access to my money, which turned out to be a very different kind of blocking, and the only kind I actually owed her. And the group chat itself, the one I'd never been added to, I asked to be added to going forward, not so I could plan the next trip, but so I'd stop finding out about my own family's life through a caption written for 60,000 strangers before it ever reached me. There was no dramatic refund negotiation. No fight over the deposit, no argument about who owed what for the extra nights. That was never actually the point of any of this, and I think some part of my mother understood that even as Paige tried, briefly, to steer the conversation back toward it, what I laid out instead were terms, plain, short, non-negotiable. If they wanted my time going forward, invitations would need to come in writing, addressed to me directly, not implied through a chore list left on a counter. If they wanted my money, it would come as a gift I chose to give. When I chose to give it, never again, as an automatic pipeline nobody had to ask permission to draw from. No more shared cards. No more autopays quietly absorbed into my monthly statement. No more emergencies that somehow became my permanent responsibility without a single conversation about it. Paige lost access to every payment app we'd ever shared between us. I didn't block her number. I blocked her access to my money, which turned out to be a very different kind of blocking, and the only kind I actually owed her. And the group chat itself, the one I'd never been added to, I asked to be added to going forward, not so I could plan the next trip, but so I'd stop finding out about my own family's life through a caption written for 60,000 strangers before it ever reached me. Tyler, notably, didn't say much on that call at all. Near the end, right before we hung up, he said quietly, almost to himself, "Yeah, that's fair." And I don't know if he meant it as an apology or just an observation, but it was the only honest sentence to come out of that whole conversation that didn't need an itemized ledger sitting next to it to prove itself true. Somewhere in the middle of all that quiet paperwork, sitting across from a screen with my mother's face on it, I let myself have exactly one joke, the only one I allowed myself in the entire ordeal. They wanted a meme. I gave them a receipt. 2 weeks later, Labor Day came back around in the smaller, quieter way holidays come back around once the actual date has already passed. A rain check this time, with a couple of people who text me before they leave somewhere instead of after. Dana included. Actually, the same cousin who'd sent me one honest text during the worst week of this whole thing. My phone sat on the table the entire afternoon and never once lit up like a warning. I think about that chore list a lot still. Trash, plants, mail. 3 words that were never really about chores at all. They were about where I ranked in a house I'd helped keep running. These days, there's no list waiting on the counter when I stay over, because the visits themselves changed shape entirely. Shorter, less frequent, but real, the kind where nobody needs anything from me except my actual company, which turns out to be a strange and unfamiliar feeling after 6 years of being needed for everything except that. Here's what I want you to sit with. If you've ever been the one who quietly pays so everyone else gets to have the loud, easy fun, being needed is not the same thing as being loved. and it took a 2-word caption sitting under a photo of a lake for me to finally see the difference written out in plain text, where I couldn't argue myself out of it anymore. A LOL at the end of a sentence isn't a joke when it's sitting directly on top of 6 years of receipts. It's a confession, dressed up in the lightest font somebody could find, telling you exactly how much room you actually take up in the version of the story they tell when they think you'll never see it. If this was you, if you've ever quietly funded a life you were never actually invited into, I want to hear it. Are you a screenshot person, the kind who documents instead of detonating? Or are you still a silent sponsor, funding a seat at a table nobody has ever formally offered you? Tell me which one you are, one word, down in the comments. And if you want more of this, more quiet people with loud receipts, no shouting matches, just paper that never lies, stay with me. This is where the volume stays down and the ledger does all the talking.